Good morning friends, hello and welcome to the EduSite Network. Our topic of discussion today is in fact a continuation from yesterday, and this is the second part of Hindi cinema and the theme of social reform. And for this discussion we have with us in our studio the same subject expert Dr. Manoj Sharma, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Kirori College, University of Delhi, and he has been teaching for more than a decade. And with this introduction, I would like to welcome sir and also thank him. Thank you so much, sir, for coming. And I request you to begin our today's lecture.
Hello, friends. A very good morning to all of you. And continuing from yesterday, as we discussed, that how the social reform theme it was reflected in the Hindi cinema, and how Hindi cinema was influenced by the various evils which were there in the society, and how to reform them, how to present them to the people. Let us begin our discussion today with a film called Diya Naane, which was made in 1937. It was titled The Unexpected in English, and it was made by V. Shantaram. And the issue of the film was about the mismatched marriages. The problem that how the older age males, they married the younger age girls. And this film, it reflected that Shanta Apte, who played the role of the protagonist in the film, she refuses to put vermilion, the sindoor, which was some kind of a mandatory thing for all married women in India. Even nowadays we can all see all these things. But at that time in 1937, she refuses to do such a thing in this kind of film. And at the same time, she refuses to consummate her marriage. She says to her husband that he is that kind of age, which is the age of her father. So that way she refuses to be her wife in that context, and she refuses to consummate her marriage. And what finally happens in the end is that she in a way forces her husband that he accepts her as his daughter, and and at the same time he takes a vow from her that she will remarry after his death, and he commits suicide. So from that perspective, when we see, it was some kind of a revolutionary theme in considering in mind those times. And this kind of revolutionary reform spirit could only be seen when the women, they will realize that what they have to do. And unless they will believe in themselves, unless they will see that their emancipation lies in their own hands, so they cannot make these kind of efforts. And V. Shantaram, he also says that the purpose of this film was to arouse those girls that if they are victim of any kind of injustice, so they should not submit to that kind of injustice. Rather, they should fight for that injustice so that they can acquire their rights. Another film which was directed by V. Shantaram, and which was also a very significant film, keeping in mind that Devdas was made in 1935, and in Devdas there was some kind of pessimism, and Admi reflected some kind of optimism. And even V. Shantaram agrees that this film was some kind of an answer to Devdas, which was made in 1935, in which K.L. Sehgal played the role of the protagonist. And in this film, there is a story of a simple-minded policeman and an innocent prostitute, and how they fall in love, and he also offers to marry her. But the woman or the prostitute, she is haunted by some moral legacy of the past, and she walks out of the life of the policeman. She is not ready to marry him, because she believes that when she visits his house, where she meets his mother, and there she realizes that she should not marry this individual. So what we see is that in spite of the failure of the love in the film, the climax, it supported some sort of a pragmatic approach to the frustrations of the life, and the kind of glamorization of the frustration which was done in Devdas, and which had a lot of effect on the young generation of that times. Admi was opposed to it. And Devdas, Shantaram, he also acknowledges that the film which was made by Barua with the title of Devdas, and which was affecting the audience in a negative manner. So Admi was trying to rectify that error. And what we see is that Shantaram was trying to provoke the society to a new thought, that when will the society reclaim the prostitute who is more sinned against than a sinner. So Shantaram is raising these kind of questions which were very relevant to the society, because the kind of profession in which the girl was, that was not acceptable to the society, and the kind of people, those who were there, the younger generation, whether they were ready for such kind of marriages, whether they were ready so that they could reform the society in such a manner, and the evil of prostitution should not be there in the society. So all these kind of things which we see in this kind of cinema. There was another film with the title called Brandi Ki Bottle or Brandi Ki Bottle. Brandi Ki Bottle was a Marathi film, and it was also made in Hindi with the title of Brandi Ki Bottle. So the main theme of the film was prohibition, that how liquor should be banned, and in the film we see that how there were so many demonstrations against the liquor, and Congress flag, charkha, slogans which were emphasizing independence, all these were shown in the film. At the same time, what we see is that there are a lot of references to Mahatma Gandhi and as well as Vallabhbhai Patel, and this shows that there was some sort of a mood of combat among the people. And what we see is that there is a lot of patriotic flavor in the film. This kind of patriotic fervor or flavor could be seen in the songs of the film. If you see the lyrics, where people say that sharab chhodna azadi ki pehli manzil hai, that if you give up liquor, so that will be the first step to achieve independence. And there is another reference where say धन्य है गांधी बाबा और उनके माँ बाप जिनकी वजह से हम ये दिन देख रहे हैं. So long live Gandhi and his parents, because of whose grace we are seeing all these days that we are trying to reform the society and we are for the cause of prohibition. And Gandhi is referred to as Azadi ka Devta or angel of freedom in the film. So another important aspect which is related is the participation of women, that women, they largely participate in all these kind of demonstrations in the film, and women participation was very relevant from the point of view of the national movement as well. So their campaign against the evil of drinking, it brought them outside their homes, and when they were participating in the public sphere. So the coming of the women into the public sphere also became important from the context of the national movement, when national movement required them so that they come in large numbers and they participate in the various movements which were launched by the national leadership. And it not only made them aware about the social problems which were there in the society, but at the same time they became aware about the political problems as well. So this kind of participation of the women from social as well as political problems was quite relevant. Another important film which I would like to discuss is Paddoci, which was made in 1939 by V. Shantaram, and which talked about Hindu-Muslim unity. The kind of divisions which were created by the British, as you can see the slide in which you can see the poster of the film titled Paddoci, in which the story revolves around two friends, one is Hindu and one is Muslim, and how there are divisions between both of them, and these kind of divisions are led by some kind of vested interest which are there in the village. So it was also reflective of the kind of problems which were created between the Hindus and the Muslims, the kind of communalism which we see as we identify that communalism was the handiwork or was byproduct of the policies which were followed by the British, the policy of divide and rule which was followed by the British. So these kind of problems which were taken up by some of the filmmakers like V. Shantaram, and V. Shantaram portrays these problems in a very authentic as well as bold manner. And as well as we can see that in the Lahore session of the Muslim League in 1940, Muslim League demands a separate nations for the Muslims, and the individual satyagrah which was launched in 1940 by Mahatma Gandhi, in which the spirit of struggle of the masses was to be maintained. And what we see is that the kind of tensions which were brewing between the Hindus and the Muslims, they were being further fueled by the religious fanatics, those who were there on the both sides. So in this kind of atmosphere in 1940s and thereafter, where you have all kinds of violence which was there, and especially in 1946 and 47, because of which we see the partition of India and the resultant violence, because of which thousands and lakhs of people, they died, they lost their lives in the senseless violence which occurred, because of which so many people, they were displaced from their homes. The people, those who became the refugees there in their own countries, they were referred to as refugees. In their own countries, the people, those who migrated from Pakistan to India, or those who migrated from India to Pakistan. So such kind of trauma has been reflected in certain films which were made on the partition, like one of the films which was called Lahore, which was made in 1949, or some of the recent films called Pinjar, which was made, or 1947 Earth, which was made by Deepa Mehta. All these films, they talk about partition. Another film which was, another bold film was called Khamosh Pani, which was with Kiran Kher as the lead actress. So all these films, they were talking about the problems which are encountered during partition. And what we see in Paddoci is the kind of misunderstandings and the conflicts which were created between the between them by the vested interest or the third parties, so which was also happening in reality. So this kind of communal frenzy which was created by the religious fanatics, whose interests were served by creating divisions in the communities, it was also reflective of the situation, as well as the divide and rule policy, which was the hallmark of the British policy. Another important film which I would like to talk about is Achut, which was made in 1940. Achut was directed by Chandulal Shah, and it was also talking about the oppression of untouchables. And it suggested that the solution for their upliftment lied in a ceaseless fight for their rights. The people, those who were discriminated, they had to wage their own struggle, they had to fight their own battles. Then only they will be able to secure some kind of independence, some kind of upliftment for them. And some of the other issues which were directly related were temple entry or drawing water from the common wells, because untouchables, they were, or the people of the lower caste, they were not allowed to enter temples. So, and at the same time, there were issues regarding there were separate wells for different castes, and how the lower caste people, they were not allowed to access water, which was a basic prerequisite for life. And these kind of discriminations, they were being followed. So this film also reflects these kind of ideas, and at the same time that how the hypocritical, the people, those who were hypocrite, these kind of priests, they were lusting for untouchable girls, but at the same time they were not ready to touch the Harijans or untouchables, but at the same time they had this kind of lust for the girls of that particular community or that particular caste. So all these kind of things, they were being reflected in this kind of cinema, and how they were making a case in which that the people of this caste or this group, unless they will fight their own battles, then only they will be able to solve their own problems. Vallabhbhai Patel, he saw the film, and when this film was released, and he argued, and I would like to quote Vallabhbhai Patel. He says that if Achut really fulfills the ideal for which it is produced, it will have done a great and noble service to the cause of Harijans. Untouchability is a blot on Hinduism and on India, and must be wiped off as soon as possible. If the picture Achut helps India to remove this cause, untouchability, it can be said to have helped India to win Swaraj, as untouchability is one of the chief obstacles in the road to freedom. So what we see is that the political leaders, they are also aware that untouchability is also divisive in nature, and at the same time it is a blot on the society. The people, those who are living, they are all equal in the society, and unless we are able to remove this kind of situation, then only we will be able to unify the people. And that is why the freedom movement leaders like Vallabhbhai Patel, Nehru, Gandhi, etc., they were belaboring, they were asking for that we should remove this kind of distinctions which were there in the society. Film India, which was a popular magazine, film magazine of that time, it also talked about Achut, and it says that never before was such a film so badly required. as now on the eve of untouchability in India, which is also stopping the country from achieving its national independence. So these kind of ideas, they were also talked about in film magazines as well. They were asking the individuals that they should reform themselves. They were asking the young generation that if they will be able to reform themselves, then this kind of evils which were there in the society, they could also be wiped out. Jawaharlal Nehru, one of the important Congress leaders of those times, and later who became the Prime Minister of India, first Prime Minister of India, though he was not an enthusiastic supporter of the film medium, but even he sent a message to the Indian Motion Pictures Congress, which was held in Bombay in 1939. He says that the motion pictures have become an essential part of modern life, and they can be used with great advantage for educational purposes. And he hopes that industry will consider now in terms of meeting the standards and of aiming at producing high class films which have educational and social values. So how the people, those who were associated with the national movement, they were realizing the social as well as the educational importance of cinema, and how they were asking the film industry that film industry should contribute in some measure so that they can reform the Indian society. So they should also play their part in that context. Some other films which I would like to point out, one film was Indira Ma, which was made in 1934, and it also talks about the Indian cinema and how it tackled the problems of Western culture, and how Indian culture and Western culture, they were clashing in some measure. Later Andaz, which was made by Mehboob Khan, which was a love triangle and a kind of very gripping film, which also makes a powerful statement against the pitfalls of affluent Indian girls taking blindly to westernized ways of friendship and love. So this kind of dichotomy, this kind of dilemma about whether to follow the traditions which were there in India or whether to become westernized, this was reflected in this film. And there was another film which was made in 1935, as I have earlier talked about, Devdas, which was later remade in 1955 again, in which Dilip Kumar played the main part, and later again in the 21st century, in which Shah Rukh Khan played the role of Devdas with certain modification and changes in the script. But the context is that how a film which was pessimistic in nature, which was talking about arranged marriages, and it was also talking about the social barriers which were there in the society. So Devdas was making some sort of a plea that these kind of social barriers, they should be removed. Some other films which I would like to point out, one was Bal Yogini. Bal Yogini was promoting Hindu widow remarriage and how Hindu widow remarriage should take place. And at the same time, what we see is another film with the title of Adhikar. Adhikar highlighted the economic and social disparity which was there in the society. Another film which was made by K. Abbas in 1946 with the title of Dharti Ke Lal. Dharti Ke Lal was a film which was made in 1946, and Dharti Ke Lal talked about the famine which took place in 1942-43, and it was a venture of IPTA, Indian People's Theatres Association, which we will discuss in some more time. And some of the films like Brandi Ki Bottle and Anguri, which was made in 1943, they talked about the issue of prohibition or the problems which were associated with liquor. Another film which was made in 1940, which was directed by Mehboob Khan, was Aurat, and it was one of the landmark films in which a rural peasant woman, she's exhibiting that kind of courage in the film, which was not seen earlier, and how this film which originated from the film version of it was a filmic version of Paul Burke's novel The Good Earth. The film had a rural background, as I have told you earlier, and the kind of characterization which was done by Mehboob Khan, it had a lot of details, and the kind of milieu which was captured by the film. There is a lot of realism in this kind of film, in which the ideas of poverty, starvation and penury, they are being depicted in the film, and all these issues which were quite relevant to the Indian society as well. because a lot of poverty was existent in the Indian society. So the kind of religious rituals which are being shown in the film, they raise a question whether these kind of religious rituals are they have any kind of significance to the existing society, or in a way they are restricting the society in some way. Then when you say that this film called Aurat, which was made, in which it is some sort of a precursor of a famous film called Mother India. Mother India was again made by Mehboob Khan with the same storyline. The story of the film of Aurat and Mother India, it remains the same, and it talks about the kind of sacrifices which were made by the leading lady of the house, or the Mother India. And in Aurat, she also makes these kind of sacrifices, and finally she also shoots her son in the end, because he is a delinquent, and which is not liked by the female protagonist in the film. And she sacrifices her son to save the honor of woman, and the film became extremely popular. And 17 years after Aurat was released, Mother India was made in 1957. Feroz Rangoonwala, one of the important film critics and important film historian, he says that the various kind of emotions of the whole experience of a woman's life, they were being exhibited, that from a new bride to an aged mother, all these kind of problems which are there, which were associated with the farmers, they were also reflected in this kind of cinema. An important organization which I would like to talk about was the Progressive Writers Association. Progressive Writers Association was formed in 1936 under the presidency of Munshi Premchand, and a number of aspiring writers and poets, they became members of the Progressive Writers Association. It was a major cultural initiative which wanted to introduce the political awareness and social realism in the feudalist reformative action. So this organization was asking the young generation that they become more and more progressive in nature, and this kind of progressive movement, it became quite popular all through the country, and a number of people they became associated with the Progressive Writers Association, which we see. And these people, they also joined the film industry. The people, those who were associated with the Progressive Writers Association, they later joined the film industry, many of them. And the people, those who were also associated with IPTA, they also joined the film industry. So their ideas, their concerns, their view about the society, at the same time how they wanted the society to be. So all these kind of ideas were also reflected in some of the films of those times, which we can see. So Progressive Writers Association sees that a number of left-oriented writers, they found jobs in the script departments of the various films, as well as big film studios. So new avenues were opened for them, and a number of films which were written by the members of PWA, or Progressive Writers Association. Mazdoor was one film which was written by Munshi Premchand. Then Kisan Kanya in 1936, Apni Nagariya in 1940, Naukar in 1943, Chal Chal Re Naujawan in 1944, Mirza Ghalib in 1954. All these films, they were written by Saadat Hasan Manto, who was a famous person who was associated with Urdu literature. A number of stories, whose popular stories on partition, we have seen them, and at the same time he also was writing scripts for films as well. And Dharti Ke Laaz was another film which was adapted from a short story which was written by Krishan Chandra. Another important organization was IPTA, Indian People's Theatres Association, and IPTA came out of the efforts of the writers and the intellectuals, those who were associated with the Progressive Writers movement. And what we see is that in the mid-1930s, S. Sajjad Jahir and Mulk Raj Anand, they were the two founder members of Progressive Writers Association of India. They called the first meeting of the association in November 1935 in London. And in June 1935, earlier in Paris, there was a conference of the world writers where they met. And because of which an international association was formed of the writers, those who were fighting for the defense of culture against fascism. So all these kind of associations, they were fighting the kind of fascist tendencies as well. So PWA was part then of an international movement which was focusing on local popular culture with clear social and political objectives, and in which the writer was first a socially and politically responsible member of the society. So the writer, he has to be conscious about the kind of problems which are there in society, and he has to think likely that well. So Indian situation was to be kept in mind, and efforts were to be made for the emancipation, the political as well as the economic emancipation, and this is what was desired, those who were the people, those who were attached with IPTA and Progressive Writers Association as well. In 1936, what we see is that Progressive Writers Association of India opened branches in various parts of the country, Aligarh, Delhi, Lahore, Allahabad, etc. And thereon what we see is that IPTA origin is also there in 1943, and IPTA's origin was also a result of such kind of consequences, and the draft resolution of IPTA was drawn up in May 1943, and it was also geared towards anti-fascism and anti-imperialism. So IPTA's main concern was with the kind of themes which were anti-fascist in nature and which were anti-imperialist, which were anti-colonial in nature. They did not want that colonial tendencies or the imperialist tendencies in India, they should prosper. Some of the important developments which were associated with IPTA was that the first bulletin of information, first bulletin of association, which was titled as a historical background, it was published in 1943, and it states that the theatre's agenda was social communication and commitment. So social communication and commitment was one of the idea with which IPTA was established, and they had some kind of cooperation with the trade unions as well as the Kisan Sabhas. So the various Kisan Sabha movements or Kisan Sabhas or the peasant associations which are established in India, as well as the labor associations which are established in India, they were in a way some kind of collaboration with IPTA, and they also realized the various traditional folk forms, because IPTA used the traditional folk forms apart from theatre, as well as the people, those who were associated with IPTA, they ventured into the film production as well. I told you that Dharti Ke Lal was financed by IPTA. So all these things in the cultural sphere, IPTA was playing an important role, and various branches of IPTA, they also were established in different parts of the country. And in 1943, what we see is that IPTA's Central Cultural Squad was created, and when they were using the various folk forms, they were also using the urban theatre, and there was an important play which was made by IPTA with the title of Nabanna or New Harvest by Bijon Bhattacharya. So it became quite popular when this play was staged again and again, and the play was talking about the Bengal famine of 1942-43. It was a man-made catastrophe, calamity, because of the wartime policies of the British government, in which the British government was exporting a lot of food grains from India during the Second World War to the soldiers which were fighting abroad, and because of which artificial scarcity was created in the market because of the black marketers and hoarders, because of which we see that so many people, they suffered because of this kind of scarcity and that kind of famine which was there. So what we see is the self-interest of the colonialist was to such an extent that so many people, they died because of their policies. So it was some sort of a colonial critique, and that how British, those who claimed that they were more civilized, how British, they said that they were more benevolent in nature. The existence of the British rule was in 19th century or in 19th century when they came, they talked about that they were more benevolent in nature. The white men's burden, they fell on them, that they had to civilize Indians. So these benevolent people, how they were exploiting India, how they had exploited India all along, and now how they were exploiting India even now, this was reflected in this kind of cinema. So what we see is that there's a lot of influence of IPTA in 1940s and 50s cinema, and the aim of the association was to create theatre for the people, and not only for the people but also of and by the people. So people, those who were those who were commoners, they became part of various film ventures, because the films which are made by IPTA, theatre which was made by IPTA, it was talking about day-to-day realities. They were taking people, those who were the actors and actresses were the people, those who were those who had already witnessed such kind of problems in their life. So this is what was done through the efforts of IPTA, and how theatre which was enclosed, it was brought to the open skies, and how it was related intimately to the life experiences of people. And various IPTA members, they also joined cinema, and how they were associated with the screening as well as the production of films. A number of famous personalities, those who were associated with IPTA were Shambhu Mitra, Balraj Sahani, K. Abbas, Pandit Ravi Shankar, who was known as Ravindra Shankar at that time, and Bhupen Hazarika, Utpal Dutt, Rajendra Singh Bedi, Inder Raj Anand, Prithviraj Kapoor, Kaifi Azmi, A.K. Hangal, Deena Pathak, Vimal Roy, etc., Salil Chaudhary, to name a few, and there were so many others, those who have not been talked about. And how these people, they brought their ideas in these films, some of them those who were script writers, some of them those who were directors, some of them those who were music directors. For example, Vimal Roy, who was not directly a member, but he was highly influenced by the ideals of IPTA, and at the same time K. Abbas, who was a member of IPTA, who was a script writer for Awara, Shri 420, and who himself later became a filmmaker and made films like Munna, for example, and all these kind of films which were later directed by K. Abbas, including the important film in 1946, Dharti Ke Lal. Other important films were, there was a Sindhi film with the title of Ekta, which was also talking about religious toleration, that how religious toleration will be able to solve the problems of the society. Then A.R. Kardar, he made a film called Sharda, which was talking about the issue of child marriage, which was another important problem which was associated with the Indian society. And there was the communal riots which had taken place in 1946. So there was a film named Nargis, which in the advertisement of Nargis, it was mentioned that Nargis awaits the return of peace with the rest of the city. So rest of the city was awaiting peace because of the riots, and Nargis, the film, was also awaiting peace, because when curfews will be lifted, when there will be peace in the society, then only people, they will flock to the cinema halls, and then only they will see the films. Because there was an incident which was associated with Dharti Ke Lal, that as soon as the film was released, the film was a commercial disaster, because when the film was released, the riots, they broke out in the city, and many people, those who would have seen Dharti Ke Lal, they could not do so because of the kind of unrest or the situation of violence which was there in the city. Then there was another film called Sindoor, which was directed by Kishore Sahu, which was talking about the condition of a widow and how it was advocating the widow remarriage. Some of the important films which I would like to just mention, one was Samaj Ko Badal Dalo in 1947, which was again talking about the ill-matched marriages. Then Main Abla Nahi Hu in 1948, which was a story of a brave refugee woman, it also talked about. Then another film, Lahore, which was dealing with the violence on women during the partition riots. And because of those riots, the question of their life and identity. Because a number of women during the partition riots, either they were left in those regions where they were kept by their captors, and many of them, they got converted also to different religion, to the place in which they were left, and the kind of trauma they had, the kind of displacement, because a lot of violence, the bodies of women basically, they became some sort of a battlefield for the people, that how the honor of women, it became a site of contestation, has been talked about Urvashi Butalia in one of the books, the other side of silence. So all these kind of issues, they were being raised in this film Lahore, which was made in 1949 and which was dealing with the issue of partition. Dharti Ke Lal was also based on the characterization. Non-professional actors, they were being generally taken in Dharti Ke Lal, and it had some kind of neorealist traits. Neorealism was a movement in the Italian cinema in 1940s and 1950s, and which was talking about non-professional actors, and location shooting was there, and there was some sort of a moral approach was kept towards the treatment of the subject matter, as well as the social problems of the society. They were also being discussed in this kind of neorealist cinema. So IPTA also played an important role in launching the people's movement in Dharti Ke Lal, and the social and moral commitment of the directors to de-dramatize the situations, because when we are talking about realism and the realist themes, so the focus would be on de-dramatization, where the scenes and the dialogues, they will not be dramatized, rather they would be de-dramatized. They will be in a the dialogues will be in a simple language, so that there is no dramatization in that context. So Kabbas, about Kabbas, VP Sathe, he says that right from his first film Dharti Ke Lal, what we see is that Abbas was tackling different social and political problems, and he was advocating socialism, unity, equality and national integration. Moreover, the kind of problems which are there in the society in the context of the poverty and other shortcomings. So, but at the same time, Abbas was not at all pessimistic about the society. Abbas was always optimistic about the society, because the endings of the films which were made by Abbas, they were largely optimistic in nature. And this is the way his film end on the hopeful note. Another important film which I would like to talk about is the Neecha Nagar, which was made in 1946. It was directed by Chetan Anand. It was an allegorical tale between some sort of a contrast, allegorical contrast between the high and low, that there were two similar spots. One was the Uncha Nagar and another was the Neecha Nagar. And Neecha Nagar was for the commoners, and Uncha Nagar was for a rich landlord or person who is known as Sarkar, who is in a way representative of the government as well. So this film talks about this kind of Uncha Nagar and Neecha Nagar, and it was a very interesting film which was made in 1946. Some of the important or thought-provoking lyrics which were seen in this film were उठो कि हमें वक्त की गर्दिश ने पुकारा, जागी हुई राहें नई मंजिल को जाएंगी, हर दिल को नए जोश से आबाद करेंगी, खामोश निगाहें नहीं खामोश रहेंगी, आज़ाद हैं आज़ाद रहेंगी, मरना भी हमारा है तो जीना भी हमारा, उठो कि हमें वक्त की गर्दिश ने पुकारा. So being translated, we say that rise to the need of the hour. The newly awakened path will lead to the new destination. They will fill every heart with renewed energy. Silent eyes will not remain silent. We are free, we shall remain free. If our life is in our hands, then so is our death. Rise to the need of the hour. So this film was making some kind of a protest, because the people, those who were living in the Neecha Nagar, they were not at all happy with the kind of problems they were witnessing because of the kind of policies which were followed by the people, those who were living in the Uncha Nagar, especially Sarkarji. The way they were being exploited by Sarkarji in whatever ventures they wanted to go into. So this kind of disparity in terms of class struggle was evident in this film called Neecha Nagar. And another important film which I would like to talk about is The Hage, which was made by V. Shantaram. It was again a very thought-provoking film, and it was making a tirade against the dowry evil, that how dowry was an evil in the Indian society. And there's a girl who is the female protagonist, and the father of the girl, how they feel in a way harassed by the various demands which are made by the mother-in-law, which was played by Lalita Pawar. And the husband, played by Karan Diwan, he is not able to understand as well as adapt to the situation. He becomes a silent spectator in that context. This is what has been, and when you try to relate this kind of situation, this kind of situation could be seen in many houses in India. This problem of dowry was quite rampant, and this is quite rampant even now in 2014. And talking about this thing in 1950, when even these kind of ideals, when people though were not trying to be all that literate, were not trying to be all that progressive in nature. So it was a path-breaking film from that perspective. And though the film ends in a tragedy, but it was a kind of a real drama and a real situation as well, and it became a big success as well. V. Shantaram, who was the director of this film, in his own words, I would like to quote him. He says that when Hage was released in Bihar, the members of the Legislative Assembly were shocked. I don't say that they were inspired by my picture, but I think that it must have been the cause of the anti-dowry bill being passed in the Bihar Assembly. I don't say that my picture alone did it, but it happened immediately after its release, when a great controversy was raised in the state. Then when the anti-dowry bill was passed in parliament here, the members took the picture and showed it to all the parliamentarians, and after a week or so they introduced the bill in parliament and it was passed. These bills help to create to a certain extent, but unless you create this impact in the minds of the people, it is of no use. These pictures definitely have an impact. So what V. Shantaram is saying, that how his cinema led to passing of two bills. So he is not taking the credit, he is not saying that his film was responsible for passing of these bills, but at the same time he is saying that how, because of the viewing of films by so many people, those who were the decision makers in the legislative assemblies, those who were the decision makers in the parliament, when they saw this kind of poignant drama, this kind of reality which was there in the Indian society, and how this bill was passed. But at the same time he is also arguing that you have to bring some kind of change in the mindset of the people, and unless the change in the mindset of the people will come, this kind of things cannot be only changed with the kind of laws which were being framed. Another important film which I would like to talk about is Raj Kapoor's Awara, which was made in 1951. It was directed by Raj Kapoor and written by K. Kabbas. And there is a debate about the heredity and environment, that whether heredity is important or whether environment is important in the formation of an individual's personality. And the film portrays the socio-economic reality of India, in which money is the main determinant in one's position in the hierarchy of societal ladder, which was determined by the elite class or the rich class. So because in the film, when we see the film, we see that Raj Kapoor, though he is the son of an elite, or the Justice Raghunath, played by Prithviraj Kapoor, but he grows up in an area and he becomes a delinquent or Awara or a tramp. So he is shown as a tramp in the film. Until the end of the film, Justice Raghunath does not come to know that he is his son. So what we see is that there is some sort of a class conflict as well, but at the same time the kind of surroundings which Raj Kapoor receives in terms of his growing up years, they are being held responsible for the way he is. And Prithviraj Kapoor, who is the representative of the elite, and he sees that the people, those who are of high birth, they are more virtuous, and the people, those who are of low birth, they are more corrupt. And that is why he is not ready that Raj should marry his adopted daughter, played by Nargis. And what we see is that Nargis, she epitomizes love and rationalism in the film, and film also portrays tries to give the socialistic message of equality. And Nargis is a believer in the equality of men, and she is ready to marry Raj, and she is ready to accept her as friend, and she is ready to challenge the conservative elitist ideas which were there in the society. So Awara in a way portrays that class consciousness has not ended with the attainment of independence, because Awara was made in 1951. So even then this kind of class consciousness was there in the society. And the attitude of Prithviraj Kapoor in the film, which was considered to be irrational and prejudiced. The way he thinks is more in a prejudice, which was some sort of a remnant of the colonial perception towards the natives, because the colonials, the British people, they were also in a way prejudiced toward the natives of India. They thought them to be corrupt in nature, and they had this kind of irrationality in them in terms of behavior towards the natives. And what Raj Kapoor does in the courtroom scene, he is asking the society that society should wake up and they should save the youth. The youth should be saved and they should not turn into juvenile delinquents, and they should be provided such kind of environment that they become the responsible citizens of the society. So this is what he says. And in the arguments which were put forward by Nargis in the film, she also makes an argument for the humanitarian instincts of love, sympathy and compassion, and some kind of equality in the society. She also attacks the kind of economic system which was there in the society, which was in a way damaging to the society. She is demanding justice not only for Raj Kapoor in the film, but for all the people, those who are victim of their environment. Another film which I would like to talk about is Jagte Raho, which was made by Raj Kapoor in 1954. So this film was directed by Shambhu Mitra, who was an important stalwart of IPTA, and it was also a satire on society in that way, that the film was talking about the corruption, hypocrisy, selfishness and some kind of a callousness that of the people, those who were shown in the film, that the people, those who are there in the film, they are trying to be hypocrites in the society, how they are corrupt, but they are projecting themselves that they are very virtuous in nature, they are very honest. So this kind of hypocrisy was criticized in this film. And in the end of the film, in the conclusion, the use of the child as a moral eye, it was suggestive of the Neorealist practice, because the Neorealist filmmakers in Italy, and later Do Bigha Zameen also, which was considered to be the Neorealist classic, which was made by Vimal Roy, in that film also we see such kind of the use of moral eye in the form of a child. Boot Polish was another film which was made, which talks about impoverished children, their struggle for existence, and they fight against the organized beggary. So this film talks about these issues, and it also gives a social message to bring about a change, that how egalitarianism or some kind of equal treatment should be brought to the poor and the impoverished. So Boot Polish was a film which was talking about the life of the children, that how they go into the beggary and how this kind of change can be brought in the society if concerted efforts are made. Now I would like to also talk about Vimal Roy. Vimal Roy made a number of important films which were quite progressive in nature. Udair Pathe or Hamrahi was made in 1946. Udair Pathe was made in Bengali and Hamrahi was the Hindi version of this film, in which nationalist ideals they were being talked about. Another important film of Vimal Roy was Do Bigha Zameen. Do Bigha Zameen was talking about the rural indebtedness, that how a person who has become indebted at the village level, he has to come to the city, and the city was the city of Calcutta, and how he becomes a rickshaw puller there, and he wants to earn that kind of money by which he could get or secure that kind of money so that he can get his land back which he had mortgaged in his village. So this kind of problems which were there in the society, they were seen in this film. Sujata was another film which was talking about the social barriers as well as untouchability, which was made by Vimal Roy. At the same time, Parakh, which was made in 1960, was another important film which was made by Vimal Roy. So in all these films, what we see is that Vimal Roy was trying to tackle all these issues in a very subtle manner. When we talk about Sujata, in Sujata he is not making very high kind of claims, the story is very entertaining, but at the same time all these kind of ideas of reform, they are being made in a very subtle manner. Even in Do Bigha Zameen, the issue is of indebtedness, but the kind of problems the people they witness, the problems they experience when they come to the city life, and the kind of problems they have when they have to live in a city, they are also being shown through Do Bigha Zameen. And similarly, Parak was a story about the honesty, that how it is some sort of a utopian story where the script writer is demanding that how the simple minded people of a village, even they become they get corrupted when when some kind of idea in the context that they can secure some money through other means comes to them. Then another important filmmaker which I would like to talk about was Guru Dutt. Guru Dutt made certain important films, Pyasa, Kagaz Ke Phool and Saheb Biwi Gulam. They are considered to be the masterpieces which were made by Guru Dutt, and he projects a vision of a new Indian who is confused and torn between the values of a conventional and traditional society, and these new values, they are attached with modernization and commercialization of life patterns, because India, especially in late 50s and 60s, the focus was on industrialization. The society was getting more and more commercialized. The issue of modernization was also there. There was some kind of dilemma in people that whether they should go for traditional values or whether they should modernize themselves. So in this way, Guru Dutt is critical of the emergence of the new industrial human. He in a way wants to criticize the industrial human who is more practical, who is more rigid and who is more selfish in nature. And when you see the films as well, for example, when we see the film called Pyasa, in which he plays the part of a poet, the role of a poet, and how his brothers they are ready to kill him in that sense that they do not recognize him. They are ready to sacrifice his identity. He is not even considered that he is the same poet Vijay whose poems they have become very, very popular. So this kind of greed of people, the greed of his own brothers. At the same time, the lead female protagonist played by Meena Kumari, who is ready to sacrifice her love because she can then marry a person who is more financially well placed, and she refuses to marry in a way Guru Dutt, who is more of a pauper, who is living in poverty. So these kind of values which were there in the society, they were being rejected by Guru Dutt in his cinema. And Pyasa, when we see, was a reflection of that kind of cinema, where he is criticizing those kind of materialistic aspects which were there in these kind of films. Then there was another film which was made by Guru Dutt with the title of Kagaz Ke Phool, and which was a sensitive reaction against the new values of materialism, because in the context of box office, when we see that Kagaz Ke Phool was a film which was dealing with a director's life, that he himself plays the role of a film director in the film, and the people, those who were with him when he was successful, they try to run away from him now when he has become unsuccessful in his professional life. So how is his professional life and his personal life they interact with each other, and how his professional life, when he becomes unsuccessful, people, they are not ready to support him in that way. So how the material aspects which were associated, they were being supported by the same people, those who were rejecting him now. And this reflection can be seen in various lyrics of the film as well, when he says that ye duniya agar mil bhi jaye to kya hai. So in this way he is rejecting the society, and the alcoholism which is shown in the film, because in Pyasa, Kagaz Ke Phool, etc., Guru Dutt has been projected as an alcoholic. So that alcoholism is also some sort of a rebellion against the society. So alcoholism, in that way, he is trying to reject the society. And another film is Saheb Biwi or Gulam. Saheb Biwi or Gulam talks about the enslaving condition of the women in the society, that in Saheb Biwi or Gulam, Meena Kumari, who plays the role of the protagonist, and Meena Kumari in this film basically is some sort of an ornament in the family. She is not able to take any kind of decisions, and her husband is also not every day not ready to come to her. She is in a way some sort of a remnant of some sort of a symbol in the society, who is just an ornament, and she is being used by her husband and other in-laws. So this is some kind of a statement of the feudal order which is there in the society. So another important theme in this context is the portrayal of women in cinema, that how women, they are being portrayed in cinema in various films like Sujata, etc. Some of the films, they also talk about Nehruvian socialism. Nehruvian socialism in the sense that how Naya Daur and Pragam, these were the two important films which were made, which were talking about the progressive ideas of equality which were shown. Naya Daur talks about the tradition and modernity, and at the same time the labor intensive work or mechanization. These were the two important issues which were discussed in Naya Daur, made by B.R. Chopra. Then Pragam was another film which was made in 1959, and in one of the lyrics of the film, इंसान का इंसान से हो भाईचारा यही पैगाम हमारा. So let there be brotherhood of humans. This is our message. This is what the film talks about, that how the disparities in the society, they could be done away with. Some of the parallel cinema or art cinema in which Shyam Benegil's film called Ankur I would like to talk about, which was made in 1974, which talks about alcoholism, because one of the characters, he not only ruins his life but also makes the life of his wife miserable in the context of alcoholism. Casteism is another issue which has been talked about, and the film provides a lot of details with regard to the caste system, especially in the rural setup, and how the villagers, they expect a Dalit girl to work in the household of an upper caste, but at the same time this Dalit girl should not make food for her, because this way the upper caste will lose their the status of the upper caste. So this kind of traditions which were rejected in the society, they were being shown in this film. Another issue was the issue of rich and poor, and at the same time the issue of dowry as well, because Shabana Azmi, she explains in the film that why she marries a drunken deaf mute, because she could not afford to pay dowry. And in the end, the idea of Ankur or the seedling is reflected, that with the idea of the popular rebellion, which comes in the end. Two films which I would like to talk about in 1942, Prem Rog, which was made by Raj Kapoor, in which the film is talking about a man's love towards a woman, and who's a widow and of a higher status. And conservatives are not ready with these kind of age-old traditions. So another film called Rao Saheb and another film called Water, they were also made. Deepa Mehta made this film, in which explore the lives of widows at an ashram in Varanasi, and the life of the widows is shown. Similarly, Babul, which was made in 2006, and it deals with the issue of widow remarriage, and how Amitabh Bachchan, who plays father-in-law of the female protagonist, marries her when his son dies, and he does the Kanyadan and symbolically becomes the father. And in retrospect, I would like to say that there were in number of films you find the social reform in an entertaining manner, and Indian cinema, it deals with poverty, exploitation, dowry to women's emancipation, and social conflict to national integration, from education to fantasy oriented entertainment. So all these issues, they have been covered in Indian cinema.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. And with this, friends, with very little time, we bring our lecture to a close by thanking sir. Thank you so much, sir, for being associated with us. And thank you, friends. Wish you a happy new year in advance. Happy new year. Thank you, sir.